In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. If you were tuning in last week to the service, you may have wondered all that talk about the weather, why I didn't talk about the first reading, which was the first part of Noah and the flood. And we heard the second part today, and we're going to hear the final part next week. So I thought today I'd talk a little bit about Noah and the flood. The thing that we really need to take into consideration here is that Noah and the flood is not about rain. It's actually not about the weather at all. The key thing, we had it in last week's reading and we had it in this week's reading, is the phrase, the windows of heaven and the fountains of the deep. Because what happens is when the flood comes, the windows of heaven are opened and the fountains of the deep burst forth, and then the flood comes all over the earth. Now, what that means is that this is getting into the mindset of what the ancients believed the world to be like. And so we need to sort of step outside our modern view and just step inside their heads briefly in order to get the significance of what was going on. So the way in which the world is described in the first chapter of Genesis is it's like a sort of saucer that's floating there, and on top of it is a bowl. So it's a bit like sort of one of those snow globes, really. So you've got the land here, and then there's the sky above, and all around it is the deep, the waters of chaos, everything out there that's dark and mysterious and we don't understand it. So their cosmic view, if you like, was of a sort of a giant snow globe with us in it on the land at the bottom. And what happens in Noah and the flood is it doesn't just rain, and yes, it does rain, but the windows of heaven are opened. So the flood is let in, and the fountains of the deep burst through from underneath. So effectively, what God is doing is he's smashing the bubble, smashing the globe. And in order to understand what Noah is really about, it's about the fear of the whole cosmos or universe as we know it becoming shattering, and for chaos to completely overwhelm the world in which we know it. Now, what's really interesting is that the Bible's not the only one with a flood story in it. They had it in Babylon, they had it in ancient Samaria, and they had it in Egypt. All of these flood stories have a common theme, and it's this sense of out there, beyond what we can see and know, is something that might come in and completely take over our lives. And the whole point about the flood story, of course, is at the end of it, and we'll get this next week, God gives a rainbow, which is very appropriate at the moment. He gives a rainbow in order to say, I'm never going to do that again. That doesn't mean that the fear doesn't go away, because we're programmed to be afraid of what we don't know. So let's just think a little bit about the significance of this cosmic thing. In the ancient world, they believed in all sorts of things, and one of the threads that's going through the Bible, which is largely hidden in our readings on a Sunday, is the idea that God was in conflict with a chaos monster, a dragon of some sort. And the word that we have in Hebrew for the deep is actually very much linked to the word for a dragon in Babylonian mythology called Tiamat. And in the Babylonian version of it, the god, I think it's Marduk, but I might be wrong, the god destroys the dragon and divides up the body in order to create order out of chaos. And so there is this idea that chaos can be personified as a dragon. Now, it's very interesting that we in Jewish Christian tradition also depict Satan as a dragon. And so fighting this demonical force is something that we attribute to God, because these are forces that are beyond human capacity to either observe or understand. Now, this all may sound a bit far-fetched, but if you then transpose the principle of that into our modern worldview, you actually end up with a very similar thing. So if you ask a scientist, the physicists, what does the universe look like? I think the current thing is it's something like 13.5 billion years old, and we've seen this sort of microwave background image of what's out there. And strangely enough, it's a bit like a bubble. And this bubble is a lot bigger than the biblical bubble, but it is still a bubble. It has boundaries. And beyond that, yes, we may speculate about what goes on in other universes, and there are theories out there, but even if you go beyond that, you get to the stage where there is a limit to our knowledge. And so in order to understand the Noah story, we need to look at its equivalent in the modern world. And the equivalent is the entire cosmos. So Noah is not about a global event, it's about a cosmic event. It's about God promising never ever again to destroy the entire cosmos. Now, you may be sitting there going, well, I don't really care about the cosmos. That's a very long way away and it's got nothing to do with me. But that bubble is something that can apply on a much smaller level. Sigmund Freud, the famous psychologist from Vienna, he actually wrote a book in which he took this idea of God's conflict with the chaos monster and applied it to the inside of the mind. Because within the mind you've got the conscious, the bit we can see, and the subconscious, which is like this deep that is, it's unknown, it's hidden, it's potentially a bit chaotic. And so within our minds you've got the same thing going on, and that God is in charge of not only the big picture, but the little thing that's going on in here. And while we think about mental health and all the things that keep us healthy and happy, one of the things that keeps us healthy and happy is keeping the deep within our minds where it should be, behind the boundaries that God has imposed and that are a healthy place for us to be. But it's not just that bubble. There's talk about how we might exit lockdown and have sort of bubble communities. So you have a family, household there and a household there, and they agree to be able to go to each other. And this is another bubble. And if you think about it, all of our lives are actually existing in bubbles. There's the bubble of our households, the bubble of our towns, the bubble of our country, the bubble of our social setup, whatever it is. We all exist within bubbles. And the thing that we fear is that God or anybody else might pop the bubble and then chaos ensues. And at the moment, of course, we are experiencing the destruction of some of our bubbles. We are at home or wherever it is, and the normal rules are not applying. I think it's a marvellous thing that the symbol of hope during this lockdown, in this country at least, is the rainbow. And it's the rainbow that you're seeing plastered on windows and gate posts and all the rest of it, which actually speaks so much to us. It's that promise that however much we may be afraid, however much it may look like chaos is bursting in upon us, God has promised to keep things stable. The big bubble that we live in, the most significant bubble, is the bubble of life, because our lives have ends to them, beginnings and ends, birth, death. And death is that boundary that makes us fear what's beyond it. And so the chaos that we fear in so many different ways, we also fear as on the other side of death. And so here we are in Easter, when we think about how even that is within God's control. So as we think about Noah, let's just expand our concepts out. A few years ago, I bought a bicycle from Halfords. It was a mountain bicycle, and I thought it was black. It was sort of metallic black, had little metally bits in it. And I went to the catalogue to see, where this black one was, and was very surprised to learn they didn't have a black bike of the sort that I wanted. I found the image of it, and it described the colour as cosmic meltdown. Well, I thought, well, that's a bit of a marketing ploy, if ever there was one, because this fear of something cosmic, something massive happening in our lifetime is something that runs very deeply within us. So whether Noah is cosmic meltdown or near cosmic meltdown, I don't know. Whether the coronavirus is another form of cosmic meltdown or cosmic catastrophe, I don't know. But what I do know is that however big it is, however chaotic it may be, God is more powerful than the waters of chaos. God can defeat the dragon. God can do anything. And I believe that God will protect us and keep us safe, still within the boundaries of how we live and exist and die, but that his love for us is enough for us to hope that the rainbow symbolises so much more than just what we're going through now. It symbolises a hope and a meaning for our very existence. You see, our human life is not just chaos. There is order, there is purpose, there is meaning. And when God looks at us within our little bubbles, he sees us as kin, because we are made in his image. And it's because of that that he does what he does. He puts the rainbow up there in order to give us some hope, give us some trust in him, that beyond these impossible forces that we can never understand, he is there. He is looking after us. And yes, within the boundaries of our bubble, of our human lives, our birth, our death, and all the other boundaries that we have and that we experience, we look to him for some substance, for some meaning, for some order and quiet and rest, where we may grow spiritually, because that bubble is a physical bubble. It is a bubble of this world. Our spiritual lives are something that are eternal and exist outside the bubble. And so let's put our trust in God, as Noah did, and let's sort of float with Noah on the waters of chaos and not worry about them, because God has protected us, and God will continue to make us in his image and bring us to perfection in him. Amen.